I'd heard the saying 1,000 times before it actually mattered to me. People said it like a joke, like a warning you laughed off because you were young and thought you were immune to consequences. Don't stick your dick in crazy. It sounded crude, exaggerated, like something you only really understood after you'd lived a little. Back then, I thought it was just something bitter people said after bad breakups. I didn't think it would ever apply to me. My sophomore year, I lived in a long, narrow dorm hallway that always smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and stale pizza. Doors slammed at all hours. Music leaked through thin walls. Everyone knew everyone else's business, whether they wanted to or not. That was where she lived, 3 doors down from me. You couldn't miss her. She had that kind of presence that sucked the air out of a room without trying. Dark hair, sharp features, the kind of confidence that made people turn their heads even when they pretended not to. At first, I just thought she was attractive. Not mysterious or dangerous or unhinged, just hot. We crossed paths in the hall, at the communal kitchen, in the laundry room. Sometimes we'd be part of the same group, sitting on the floor at someone's room while people passed around cheap beer and argued about music or movies. She laughed loud, talked fast, and always seemed to be pushing just a little too hard, like she was daring people to challenge her. I started flirting with her in a way that felt harmless. A comment here, a joke there, nothing bold, nothing that put me too far out on a limb. We shared a couple of interests, some of the same bands, a similar sense of humor when she wasn't being abrasive. I figured maybe there was something there, or at least the possibility of something. When she shut me down, it wasn't quiet. She didn't pull me aside or brush me off gently. She did it in front of people, loud and theatrical, like she was performing. She laughed and said something about how I was cute for trying, but clearly not worth her time. The room laughed with her. I felt my face burn, that deep, crawling embarrassment that doesn't fade quickly. I mumbled something and backed off, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. After that, she seemed to fixate on me. It started small, comments slipped into conversations that didn't need them. She'd look straight at me and make jokes about guys who talked big but probably had nothing to back it up. She'd speculate, loudly, about how some men were probably compensating for things they lacked. Every so often, her eyes would flick toward me, just long enough for me to know it was intentional. Then it escalated. She'd single me out in groups, asking rhetorical questions that were clearly aimed at humiliating me. How small do you think he is? Do you think he's ever satisfied a woman in his life? The words hit harder because of the laughter that followed. People didn't always mean to be cruel, but they went along with it, because it was easier to laugh than to challenge her. I became a punchline I never agreed to be. I started to dread seeing her. Walking down the hall felt like a risk. Any gathering felt like a potential ambush. I tried to avoid her, but in a dorm, avoidance only goes so far. I could feel resentment building, mixing with embarrassment and anger in a way that made my stomach knot every time I heard her voice. What fucked with me the most was that part of me still found her attractive. I hated that about myself. I hated that someone who treated me like that could still get under my skin. I told myself I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of reacting, so I stayed quiet. I swallowed it. I let it turn inward. By the end of the year, everything felt heavier. Finals were looming. People were partying harder, drinking like they were trying to forget the stress and the fact that everything was about to change. One night, there was a party in another dorm, crowded and loud and chaotic. I didn't plan on staying long. I just wanted to show my face, have a few drinks, and disappear. She was there. I noticed her almost immediately, leaning against a counter, drink in hand, laughing too loudly at something someone said. I told myself to ignore her. I grabbed a drink and started talking to someone else, then someone else. One drink turned into 2, then 3. The noise blurred. The edges softened. At some point, she ended up near me. I don't remember exactly how it happened. One second I was talking to a friend, the next she was there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something different about her that night. Less sharp, more unfocused. We drank more. Together, this time. The tension that had always existed between us felt thicker, heavier, like it was humming under my skin. When she started in again, another comment, another jab about my dick size, it hit differently. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was months of bottled up anger, but something in me snapped. I remember the moment clearly, like everything slowed down. She said something cruel, something designed to get a reaction, and instead of shrinking back or firing off an insult, I stepped toward her. Before I could talk myself out of it, before logic could catch up, I grabbed her and kissed her. It was messy and uncoordinated, all teeth and alcohol and pent-up emotion. For half a second, I expected her to shove me away, to laugh in my face again. She didn't. She kissed me back. The room around us faded. Suddenly, we weren't the joke anymore. People stared. Someone whooped. Someone else yelled something I didn't catch. We were tangled together in the doorway, hands clumsy, balance unsteady. And Ra appeared, clearly annoyed, and told us to take it somewhere else or break it up. We laughed like idiots and staggered away together, out into the hallway, down toward our floor. My head was spinning. My heart was pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with alcohol. Part of me knew this was a bad idea. A very bad idea. But that part was quiet, drowned out by adrenaline and something darker, rage, maybe, mixed with desire. When we reached our floor, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the communal showers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room echoed with our laughter as we stumbled inside. Clothes hit the floor without much thought. The water came on, hot and loud, steam filling the space. Everything after that felt unreal, like it was happening to someone else. I remember the heat of the water, the slick tile under my feet, the way her hands gripped my shoulders. I remember the way she said my name, over and over, louder than I expected, like she was trying to prove something to herself as much as to me. I was drunk enough that my thoughts came in fragments, flashes of awareness between waves of sensation. For a brief moment, just a second, I felt a strange clarity cut through the haze. A thought surfaced, sharp and undeniable. This girl is fucked up. This is a mistake. You know this is a mistake. I ignored it. Whatever anger I'd been carrying, whatever humiliation I'd swallowed all year, poured out of me in that moment. It wasn't about connection or affection or even attraction anymore. It was about power, about proving something. To her, to myself, to the version of me that had stood silently while she laughed. By the time we left the shower, my head was spinning, my body heavy. She dragged me down the hall to her room, the lights low, the world narrowed to the space between us. She tossed something onto the bed, a condom, and I barely registered it. Thought had given up by then. Instinct and emotion were in control. Afterward, when it was over, when the noise and the movement finally stopped, there was a strange quiet. She lay there, breathing hard, eyes half closed, a lazy smile on her face. She said something about how she'd never had it like that before, how intense it was. Her words floated past me without really landing. I stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, the reality of what I'd done starting to settle in. The room felt different now. Smaller. Too intimate. I pulled myself together, grabbed my clothes, and left without much of a goodbye. The hallway was empty. Silent. As I walked back to my room, the alcohol buzz began to fade, replaced by something heavier. A sour, uncomfortable feeling settled in my chest. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt dirty. Not physically, but emotionally, like I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I told myself it was just a drunken hookup. Just a mistake. Something that wouldn't matter in the long run. But even then, deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The next morning I woke up with a headache that felt like it was splitting my skull from the inside out. My mouth was dry, my stomach uneasy, and for a few seconds I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together where I was and why my body felt so heavy. Then memory came rushing back in fragments, flashes of the party, the hallway, the shower, her face, her voice saying my name. I groaned and rolled onto my side. There was no dramatic panic, no instant regret that hit me all at once. It was slower than that. More insidious. A creeping discomfort that grew the more awake I became. The alcohol fog lifted, and with it came clarity, and clarity was not kind. I replayed the night in my head, over and over. Not the parts that made me feel powerful, but the moments where I'd ignored what I already knew. How calculated her cruelty had been all year. How quickly rage had replaced judgment. How little the situation had actually been about desire and how much it had been about proving something I'd felt was taken from me. When I ran into her later that day, it wasn't dramatic. We passed each other in the hallway, both of us walking back from class. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and said my name like it meant something different now. There was no apology in it. No acknowledgement of the months of harassment. Just ownership, like the night had rewritten the narrative in her favor. Crazy night, she said. Yeah, I replied. That was it. She didn't bring it up in public. Neither did I. But the dynamic had shifted, and I could feel it every time she was in the same room. The jokes stopped, not because she'd realized they were cruel, but because they were no longer useful. The audience was gone. The power had changed shape, not disappeared. People started acting differently around me too. Subtle things, side glances, smirks. The story had spread, distorted and embellished the way dorm stories always do. Some version of me had become a character, confident, vindicated, proven. I didn't recognize that version, but everyone else seemed to accept him easily. I thought I should feel better about that. I didn't. What surprised me most was how empty it felt once the dust settled. I'd spent months carrying humiliation like a weight, convinced that if I could just flip the script, everything would balance out. But it didn't. The night hadn't erased anything. It hadn't healed me. It had just added another complicated layer on top of everything else. She never became a problem again in the obvious ways. No more public jabs. No more humiliation dressed up as humor. But there was still something unsettling about her presence, about the way she looked at me sometimes, like she knew exactly what she'd unlocked and didn't care about the cost. We never slept together again. I didn't want to, and I think she knew it. The tension that remained wasn't sexual, it was psychological. A reminder that we'd both crossed a line for reasons that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with damage. As the year ended and people began to move on with their lives, the story faded into background noise. New gossip replaced old gossip. New drama took center stage. On the surface, things went back to normal. Internally, though, something had shifted. I became more cautious, more aware of the reasons behind my impulses. I started recognizing how easily anger could disguise itself as confidence, how quickly validation could become a trap. That night forced me to confront a version of myself I didn't particularly like, someone who'd let resentment drive the wheel and called it victory. Looking back, I understand why people repeat that warning like a joke. It isn't really about sex. It's about boundaries, about knowing when desire is genuine and when it's just reaction. About recognizing that proving something to someone who wants to hurt you rarely brings the closure you imagine. I don't regret surviving that year. I don't regret standing up for myself, even imperfectly. But I do regret needing alcohol and anger to do it. I regret learning that lesson the hard way. Because in the end, the most uncomfortable truth wasn't about her. It was about me. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest memories, but it doesn't erase them. It just changes how they sit with you. Years later, when I think back on that period of my life, it no longer feels raw or explosive. It feels instructive, like a lesson I didn't know I was studying for at the time. After that year ended, I moved on in the practical sense. New housing, new classes, new people who didn't know that version of me. The hallway gossip stayed behind, trapped in that building with its flickering lights and thin walls. From the outside, it probably looked like a clean break. Inside, it took longer. I noticed it first in small ways. I was slower to flirt. Slower to trust attention that felt too sharp or too intense. When someone laughed at my expense, even lightly, I felt that old knot tighten in my chest. Not because I believed it, but because I remembered how easily laughter could turn into something else if you let it. I dated a little. Nothing serious. I kept things light, surface level, as if staying shallow would keep me safe. Whenever things started to feel emotionally charged, I pulled back. I told myself I just wasn't ready for anything heavy, but if I was being honest, I was afraid of confusing desire with validation again. Afraid of losing control the way I had that night. What stayed with me most wasn't the sex. It was the realization of how thin the line was between feeling powerless and craving power. How quickly humiliation could turn into rage. How easily I'd convinced myself that proving something, even in the ugliest way, would fix what had been broken. It didn't. I eventually admitted something to myself that I hadn't wanted to face at the time. Part of me had wanted that night to mean more than it did. Not romantically, not emotionally, but symbolically. I wanted it to rewrite the months before it, to stand as evidence that I wasn't who she'd made me out to be. But other people don't get to define you, and neither do moments like that. They just reveal things you have to decide what to do with. The irony is that once I stopped caring about proving myself, things got easier. Confidence, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need revenge. It shows up quietly when you know your boundaries and respect them, even when you're angry, even when you're tempted to cross them. I never saw her again after that year. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers it the way I do, or if it was just another night to her, another game played and finished. I don't feel anger toward her anymore. Just distance. The kind that comes from understanding that some people pass through your life not to stay, but to show you something uncomfortable about yourself. If I'm honest, that night forced me to grow up faster than I wanted to. It stripped away the fantasy that humiliation can be erased with dominance, or that being desired, even aggressively, automatically heals old wounds. It taught me that self-respect doesn't come from winning ugly battles, but from refusing to fight them at all. So when people repeat that old warning now, half joking, half serious, I understand it differently than I used to. It's not about judging others or labeling them. It's about recognizing when your choices are being driven by anger, insecurity, or the need to prove something to someone who doesn't deserve that kind of power over you. That night didn't ruin me.